My name is Rick Bloodworth. This is the Common Sense Christian Patriot channel, and today I want to talk to you in part about a speech that I heard this past week by Dr. Ben Carson. Now, I imagine most of you are familiar with Dr. Carson. He was not only a very famous neurosurgeon, but he also, after his surgical career, entered into politics. And I would say that he entered into politics rather reluctantly. But Dr. Carson is two things, if nothing else. He is a very avid historian, and he's a very devoted Christian. And it was because of his Christian faith, and it was because of his knowledge of what America was founded on and what America once was, but also an observation of what America has become, that led him to believe that he was responsible for getting involved in politics. I met him very briefly back in 2015. He was in Amarillo, Texas on a book signing tour, and I can remember asking him if enough of us wanted him to, would he run for president? To which he just laughed because, of course, this book signing tour was in large part an exploratory expedition to see if there was enough interest for him to run as president, and there certainly was. And so he threw his hat into the ring, so to speak, and in the 2016 election cycle was a quite prominent candidate for the Republican nomination for the presidency. Of course, we all know how that turned out. President Trump not only won his party's nomination, but became president. But because of Ben Carson becoming involved with that, he became the secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Now that's a department I'm fairly familiar with because the first 13 years of my career were in real estate appraising, and 10 of those years I did appraisals for the Department of HUD. I was an independent appraiser, but I had a lot of assignments through them. So I was very interested in that when Dr. Carson became the head of that department, very pleased, and he's done a great job. I think he brought some very needed reform to that department, but he also, I believe, reduced racial tensions, not only in that department, but in the entire country because of his soft-spoken demeanor and his absolute determination to try and just treat everybody like everybody else, regardless of their race or their beliefs. He's been very successful at that. He's a humble man who I believe has done a lot of good. During this speech, he really did want to emphasize several things. One, that America was at a very critical juncture. We have been overtaken by a social gospel. Popular culture has very much gone in a direction that is opposite of what God has wanted us to go in. And it's certainly opposite as well of the direction that our founding fathers wanted us to go in. And because of that, America is not doing as well as it used to. Popular culture right now teaches a social gospel, according to Ben Carson, that sexual perversion is normal, that it's natural, and that it is healthy. Well, of course, God has told us that sexual perversion is not normal. Nature tells us it's not natural, and certainly true science has shown that sexual perversion is one of the most unhealthy lifestyles that you can imagine. But it's a very popular teaching. It's one that has been taught to our young people over and over and over. A wise man once said, it's much easier to believe the lie you've been told hundreds of times than the truth that you've never heard before or have only heard a few times. And certainly that's, I believe, the situation we find ourselves in today. Most of our young people and many of our old people believe that which is right is wrong, and that which God defines as wrong is now right. And there needs to be a change on that. A lot of the so-called preachers in our modern culture have also drunk from the same Kool-Aid, and they're preaching these same things. They've lost the courage to preach the good news of Jesus Christ, and they have gone to the social gospel. Maybe they never had courage at all. Maybe they're in preaching for the wrong reason. Maybe it's for the money or for the influence or whatever reason they have of their own. but many preachers and pastors and priests have started to embrace this social gospel that has nothing to do with the good news of Jesus Christ, but has everything to do with furthering something that is much more satanic and demonic than anything which is godly. But that's the position we find ourselves in. Along the same lines, many people believe that abortion is something that is a human right. They will argue with you in their modern day wisdom that that which is within the womb and has a beating heart really isn't a human being, and therefore you can dispose of that which is within the womb at any time that you want to. And that's in fact what they're doing. It's a terrible thing. It's an unrighteous thing. It's something that should horrify us. But I suspect over half of the nation believes that having the right to an abortion is something that is good. God addressed things like this back in Jeremiah's time. He was talking about some of the sins that had occurred in the past, especially under King Manasseh. King Manasseh, we're told in 2 Kings, had shed much innocent blood. And we're told that this was something that God was unwilling to forgive. There needed to be a punishment for the shedding of this innocent blood. Well, Jeremiah talks about that. He quotes God as saying this in verse 7 of Jeremiah 15. I will bring bereavement and destruction on my people, for they have not changed their ways. The reason I believe that Ben Carson's message is so vital today is because we need to change our ways. We're very similar to the nation of Judah when they got to the point where God determined that he was going to have to bring a punishment on them. He didn't want to. As a matter of fact, in this same chapter and verse 19, he said this, if you'll repent, I'll restore you that you may serve me. Well, I believe America has that same opportunity. Judah decided to decline that opportunity. We can't afford to do that. Judah was largely destroyed. They were carried off into captivity, the few that remained, and they were not allowed to come back to Jerusalem for 70 years because of the wickedness that they had committed and the wickedness their fathers had committed. God punished them thoroughly. And it wasn't until they repented that he allowed them to come back and have their kingdom restored until the time of Christ. Well, in America today, we face, I believe, a similar tipping point. We are to the moment in time where the vast majority of people seem to be inclined to think that good can be evil and that evil can be good. It's our duty to take righteous stands. Dr. Carson made, I thought, to be an excellent point when he said, America cannot be the land of the free if we are not first the home of the brave. We're going to have the courage to take righteous stands, to call out this open wickedness that we seem to have embraced in recent years and call it for what it is, sin, and encourage people to repent of it. There needs to be a revival in America. This is one of the main themes of Dr. Carson's speech, was a need for revival, but he also talked about the fact that we have a hope. We can have a revival in this nation, but it has to be a spiritual revival first before we can ever hope to do anything about the political situation that we have today. He shared several things that I thought were remarkably hopeful, though. He pointed out that the president's cabinet and a number of senators meet on Wednesday nights for a Bible study and a prayer session. I was unaware of that and very encouraged to hear that. And he also had another anecdote that I found very encouraging. He was talking to President Trump, and he was pointing out that they were getting older, and he was wondering how the president was able to be so energetic in his job. And the president said that he believed that God gave him the energy to do the things that he needed to do. Well, that's the mindset you need, isn't it? I'm not saying our president is a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination, but I am impressed that he does believe in God and that he seeks God's help to give him the energy he needs to do the right things. And so those two things were very encouraging to me. One of the things that I believe that Dr. Carson emphasized is this. We have a modern day group of preachers that are far more interested in preaching the social gospel rather than the good news of Jesus Christ. And he pointed out that our preachers are going to have to start getting up in the pulpits and preaching righteousness again and rejecting the false teachings of our modern era. We don't need to be hateful about that, but we do need to be firm. We need to understand that we do have a duty before God and a duty to our country, and we need to take that seriously. And I believe he's right. I've preached for about 30 years now, and I'm absolutely convinced that the preachers have not been taking strong stands through the years. I've been told on a number of occasions when I'll go and do a gospel meeting that some of the things that I'm talking about are things that they haven't heard taught before, or they don't hear taught very often. And so I know that there is a need for righteous men to take stands unless we're willing to allow our nation to continue down a destructive path. It never fails to impress me that Judah, God's chosen people, the nation of Israel, were still destroyed because they refused to turn back to what God had defined as right. Do you think America is going to succeed any better than God's chosen people if we continue down a destructive path? We do need a revival in America. That's going to take courage on our parts, and I believe it's something that begins with the individual. If the individual can start having a revival in their life, a spiritual revival in their life, that's going to allow the church to experience a revival. And it will take a revived church to help the communities experience a revival. And then the communities will be able to influence the nation. And once again, I believe our nation will have an opportunity to have a righteous influence on the rest of the world. We do need a revival in America, but it needs to be a spiritual revival if it's going to do any good. That means you and I are going to have to get to work. We're going to have to be praying to God for wisdom as to how to take these righteous stands. We're going to have to get into His Word and be reading it to know what He expects of us. And then we need to love our country enough to do something to save it. But if patriotism is not enough for you, then maybe I should leave it with this. If we don't have enough love for our country to have the courage to take a stand, we absolutely have to have enough love for God and for our children and for our grandchildren to take a righteous stand and to start this revival. It will begin with you and it will begin with me. It can spread out from there, but once again, it's going to require that we take our duty seriously. Ben Carson rightly pointed out that we cannot remain the land of the free unless we become once again the home of the brave. It's time for us to restore a courage to our lives, a courage that will allow us to take righteous stands. And we do that because we love God, we love our family, and we love our country in that order. If we can do that, I believe the revival will succeed. Shy of that, I believe we're going to be doomed for the same failure that we saw the nation of Judah go through some 2,500 years ago. Well, I appreciate your listening today. I hope this gives you something to think about. If you get a chance to listen to some of Dr. Carson's speeches, I would do that. He's got a 5-minute speech at Charlie Kirk's funeral that I believe every American needs to hear. That would be a good place to start. But thank you for listening today. I appreciate your watching to this point. I hope we'll see you again next time. But until then, I pray that God will richly bless us as we seek to serve Him and as we seek revival, first in our own lives, one that will continue to revive the nation. God bless.